When we begin to think about these things, one of the jobs as leaders in religion is to create safe space. And safe space allows us to embark upon these kinds of questions, these things, to make it easier for us to get into, delve into things, and not as a means of saying we're not faithful, we don't believe. Not that. Again, I'm speaking about that emphasis that Abraham had in his heart and his inside of him. He wanted to know. He was curious and wanted to know. He really wanted to know. Sometimes this is presented to us as not the way in Scripture, when all throughout Revelation, God is asking us questions time and time again. One of my favorite, he said, does the human person think that they will be left alone in this life without a purpose? Does the human person think that they'll just be left alone, meaning to wander like aimlessly to here to there, without a real purpose? And it's just this question that's out there. I can remember growing up again, sometimes, my mother, perhaps, she would ask me a question, and one of these rhetorical questions, after I probably have done something that wasn't too cool, wasn't too smart. And she would ask me a question like, was that the smart thing to do? Now, depending on how I answer that, would probably bring, a consequence, or not, So sometimes I just would say, well, probably not, Every time I try to reason or justify some things based upon after a question like that came, I usually got myself into deeper trouble. But the point is that we're always being invited to question. We're always being invited to think. There will be some things in our religious life that we won't have an answer for. There were some things that we read that doesn't necessarily fully connect with us all the time. That's okay. It's normal. It's a normal part of our evolution. There's a story, for example, and then I want to open it up for a few more questions. I hope to get to a couple specific things that you may have. I was reading the story of Moses. That story is also in the Quran. And the idea of how he was leading his people to salvation after they had been suffered some oppression and so on. And one of the stories, as perhaps you're very familiar with, that he got to the edge of the sea and he couldn't go any further. And through a process, we had a staff, and he put the staff down at the edge of the mouth of the sea, and it opened up and parted, and they were able to pass through with safety. And those who pursued them actually were consumed in the water. Now, that's the very short version. It's a very beautiful narrative, but for time, I'm just giving the very short version. Now, I thought to myself, I was at a lake, and I consider myself to be a person who believes and be faithful and so on. And I got to the edge of the water and had a stick in my hand, and I thought about it, and I thought for the life of me, as much as I prayed about it, that water didn't part for me. It didn't open up for me. And I thought, well, perhaps, this was only meant for Moses. Perhaps this was not something that was meant for me. But then one of the truths that we come to understand about Scripture is that it's for all of us. For any one of us who endeavor to read it or to find guidance, it's for you. So I had to come to make some sense about, what does this really mean then? What does this really mean? If the water won't part for me, then how am I to benefit from this story? How am I to make sense of it? What's the value in it? All these questions came to my mind. All these questions came to my mind about something that was in Revelation, in Scripture. Then I began to think, and I went back to one of the things my father told me. He said, sometimes, son, he said, it's more about what the message is telling you than literally what's going on. Kind of like the story about the tortoise and the hare. do we really think that the rabbit talked to the turtle and the turtle responded to him? Do we really think that happened? Probably not. Probably not. But was there truth conveyed in their interaction? Just like you said, the idea of him being cocky and him underestimating the turtle. And the principle of slow and steady wins the race. Have you ever heard that before? Slow and steady wins the race. Have you ever heard that? Okay. Now raise your hand if you believe that. All right, all right. So there is some truth to this idea of a story that is fictional, perhaps fictional, in the sense that did it happen like that literally? Maybe, maybe not. But is there truth, or is there a message that can be conveyed from this story? Definitely it could. So I looked at the story of Moses as just that he was being chased and pursued by those who oppressed. And sometimes, if you remain faithful and trusting to God, that he can make a way for you when seemingly there was no way. There was no way for him to move on. They were at the edge of water. They couldn't turn back. They were being pursued. So it was either go into the water or perish, perhaps. And in that instance, as the narrative began to go, the water opened up and they were able to pass through. Have you ever been in a situation that you didn't know how you would get out of? Or you didn't know how you would perhaps handle it? You perhaps at your wit's end, you're like, I don't know how this is going to work. And somehow, seemingly, something happened, a course of events took place, and an opportunity was presented to you that perhaps wasn't there before. Has that ever happened to you? No? Live a little. So my point to you is that when we're looking and thinking about Scripture and reason, we never, we're taught in our religious tradition that we never turn off our reasoning, our thinking, as we're pursuing revelation or Scripture. We don't do that. We're invited to use it and invited to explore with our thinking, our minds, and our intelligence as we're reading the stories and the guidance that comes by way of Scripture and revelation. But at the same time, we also know that there will be some things that are presented to us that are beyond our comprehension. You won't understand everything. You won't be able to totally comprehend everything. But that's not that when our faith and our religion and ourselves combine together, that's what gives us the guidance to move forward. I wanted to take a moment to open up and perhaps have a little bit of a dialogue and questions and answers. And there's so many ways that we can go with this idea, but the fact that we're saying that it's okay to have questions about things, and it's okay to bring your thoughts and your minds to things. And we hope that this message resonates with you as young people and young leaders. As you grow older and experience more and more things in life, don't be afraid to question. Not so much out of just doubting your religious tradition or doubting God. I'm not suggesting that. I'm saying, but so you can be satisfied with that curiosity that you have within you.